Right now on Morning News Now, President Trump doubling down on his trade war despite mounting pressure to pull back.
When countries don't allow us to sell our product, but we allow them to sell their product, those days are over.
Less than a week after Donald Trump started the largest, dumbest trade war in American history, all the signs say America is heading towards calamity.
Now, Wall Street bracing for another wild ride as the president threatens adding more tariffs against China. We have team coverage. Also, a controversial ruling by the Supreme Court to keep a man behind bars after he was deported to an El Salvador mega prison by mistake. More on the decision, the reaction, and what happens next. Developing this morning, parts of the U.S. underwater after a strong spring storm system brings days of torrential downpours. Meanwhile, freeze alerts are in effect this morning from Nebraska to West Virginia. We are tracking it all. And she built a company that turns waste to riches, one leftover meal at a time. We will introduce you to the CEO of Too Good to Go in our latest edition of Women Mean Business. It's a cool one, and if you haven't heard of it, and this app exists in your city, you're going to want it. Good morning. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Savannah Sellers. Joe's off this morning. We're going to begin our show with President Trump's trade war, which is threatening to escalate further this morning. That is after China vowed to, quote, fight to the end if Mr. Trump followed through with his threat to impose an additional 50% tariff on Chinese imports. Now, the warning comes after Beijing said last week it would impose a 34% levy on U.S. imports in response to the Trump administration's latest tariffs. Now, despite the heightened trade tensions, financial markets appear to be stabilizing this morning. This is following days of heavy losses, of course. Asian markets closed sharply higher, while Europe is also currently in the green. And here in the States, U.S. stock futures are pointing to a positive open. In a few minutes, we are going to speak with NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer. She's in Beijing for us, but we're going to start off this morning with NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung and NBC News correspondent Ryan Nobles. Good morning to both of you. Brian, I will get started with you. You have been busy, my friend. We appreciate you being here early with us. So roller coaster ride, really, yesterday. Walk us through what we saw happen yesterday and why it does seem things could be a little bit better today.
Yeah, I mean, let's just call it what it is. Yesterday was crazy.
Yeah.
We started off the day down, and this underscores just how sensitive markets are.
Right.
Markets shot up from down 2% to up like 3.5% off of a fake headline that purported that the White House was looking at delaying tariffs on every country except for China for 90 days. Again, that was entirely false. In fact, later on that day, we heard the president double down on his official Truth Social account, saying that he was going to look at adding another 50% on China. And then we saw markets go down, and then they kind of fluctuated up and above where they closed the day on Friday before they finally closed the day on the end of that Monday, basically down 0.25% on the S&P 500, which looks like a nothing burger. But again, it was crazy volatile during most of the day. It looks like for right now, futures are pointing to a positive open for the Tuesday trading. The S&P futures up about 1.4%, Dow futures up 1.9%. But again, anything could happen in this type of market, Savannah. And just because the market opens at one number, we just have no idea what it looks like at the end of the day. The volatility is still very much in place.
Gosh, and that point that it was all off of basically a fake headline that caused such confusion yesterday. Ryan, let's bring you in here now. Despite all this market volatility, it doesn't look like the president is planning to hit the pause button on tariffs anytime soon. What are we hearing his reasoning here and where things stand on negotiations with any countries?
Yeah, you have to take into account what Donald Trump's goal here is when it comes to implementing these tariffs. Now, he's talked a lot about what he calls reciprocal tariffs, which means that he wants the United States to levy the same amount of tax on imports and exports that other countries put on our goods that come into their countries. But what he's really trying to solve for is a trade imbalance, meaning the amount of products that American consumers buy versus the amount of products from America that foreign consumers buy. And that's a long-term play. It basically means flipping the manufacturing pipeline across the entire world and changing the global economy. But Donald Trump appears to be willing to stick it out, to do that as long as possible to reach that goal. Listen to what he said yesterday.
We're not looking at that. We have many countries that are coming to negotiate deals with us, and they're going to be fair deals. And in certain cases, they're going to be paying substantial tariffs.
So essentially what Donald Trump has engaged in here with these big countries across the world is a staring contest, just to basically see which country's willing to take on more pain as a result of this trade war. China's made it clear that they're not backing down. Other countries may have a different opinion, but what Trump is hoping is that they'll enter into some sort of negotiation that flips this trade imbalance across the country. But that's not something that's going to happen in the short term. It's really a long-term play that Donald Trump is looking at.
Brian, obviously this is causing a lot of people angst, whether it's just any of us looking at our retirement accounts, our investments, or leaders of big businesses. And our colleagues over at CNBC, they have what's called their CEO survey, and we've got one out just recently. What does it tell us about how concerned business leaders are? Yeah, I mean, the top line says it all, which is that a majority of CEOs, again, in this survey done by our partners over at CNBC, 69% expect a recession, with over half of those CEOs saying the downturn will hit this year. And this lines up with other types of commentary we've been hearing in just the last few days, where you have JP Morgan raising the odds of a recession globally from 40% to 60%. And then yesterday we heard BlackRock's Larry Fink. I can't just underscore enough how he really is one of these very powerful financier types who has his hands kind of in every type of industry. He said that most CEOs I talked to would say we are probably in a recession right now. So these are CEOs who really get a pulse on what economic activity looks like. And it's interesting to hear them say that we might be in a recession right now, even prior to the tariffs having taken effect. So I want to point out the 10% baseline tariffs that were announced last week went into effect on Saturday, but it's not until technically tomorrow that these so-called reciprocal tariffs take effect. It's the signaling and the messaging of all of this that has introduced this uncertainty into financial markets, into C-suite offices, into Main Street, because people who live in regular households have no idea how to navigate around this. I mean, that's kind of the big thing here. Absolutely. Later this morning, we're going to be talking about just an example, like how much more an iPhone costs. What does that mean for a massive company like Apple? Ryan, what about lawmakers? Both sides of the aisle, where do they stand?
Well, you're probably not surprised to hear that Republicans are a bit more supportive of this than Democrats are. Listen to how the two sides went back and forth on this issue yesterday, with Republicans saying, just give the president time, Democrats with a much different opinion.
I think you got to give the president the latitude, the runway to do what it is he was elected to do, and that is get this economy going again and get our trade properly balanced with other countries.
Less than a week after Donald Trump started the largest, dumbest trade war in American history, all the signs say America is heading towards calamity.
And while publicly most Republicans remain supportive of President Trump, they want to give him the runway to try and accomplish these long-term goals. Behind the scenes, there is a great deal of angst among Republicans. They want to hear from the president. They want to see a plan, a roadmap as to how he expects to land this plane going forward, because they're going to start to hear from their constituents in a big way about the impact that these tariffs are having on everyday goods, especially when these prices start to go up, which every economist has predicted will happen if these tariffs remain in place. Savannah.
Ryan Nobles, thank you very much. Brian Chung, like I said, you've been doing this for us for quite a few days. I appreciate it. Thank you both. Well, let's get perspective from one of America's biggest trading partners. Let's bring in NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Ferrer. She joins us from Beijing. Janice, good morning. Obviously, so many of these headlines coming from this rift between the U.S. and China. During his meeting in the White House yesterday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump spoke about his new threatened 50% tariff on China. We just played that for viewers a moment ago. Now, stocks in Hong Kong traded slightly higher earlier today. But walk us through these tariffs, how China's responding, what markets have been like there over the past few days.
Savannah, China responded to President Trump's threat of additional tariffs with defiance and its own threat of countermeasures to fight a trade war with the U.S., quote, to the end. China is very clear in saying it's not going to back down from imposing these countermeasures to what officials here call U.S. blackmail. They see negotiation as legitimizing the tariff blitz that has hit manufacturing hubs right across Asia. Here, a spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed to me there are no talks at any level between the U.S. and China over trade. He told me, quote, the U.S. lacks a genuine willingness to engage in serious dialogue. Now, before the markets open here today, the government unleashed a series of measures aimed at helping to stabilize the stock market, and we saw it turn higher today. That included share buybacks from several state-owned companies. They're known here as China's national team. And in many ways, China has been preparing for this for a very long time, and they seem confident that there are more moves that they can make. Savannah?
Janice, U.S. total goods trade with China, I mean, just to give viewers a perspective of how large this is, it reached an estimated $582 billion last year, top trade with the U.S. Explain to us the impacts that tariffs on both countries will have on prices and what specific items we may see surge because of this.
Well, if President Trump goes through with what he has vowed, this additional 50% tariffs on all Chinese goods going into the U.S., that's 104% on anything consumers buy from China. Clothing, shoes, car parts, toys, tech, household stuff. The list goes on and on. Adidas has 82 factories in China. 80% of all toys in the U.S. are made in China. 29% of clothing and footwear. Basically everything you use in daily life. And the deadlines are now piling on. These back and forth tariffs are set to take effect over the next 48 hours. When it will be reflected in the prices you pay, that still isn't clear. It could be weeks, months, even years. Some U.S. companies are coming under pressure to move their entire supply chains, which for a company like Apple could take years. What does seem to be clear, though, Savannah, is that these higher tariffs are not going away. For global trade, this is the new norm.
Janice, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced yesterday the U.S. is opening trade negotiations with Japan. He posted on X that President Trump tasked him to co-lead the talks. What should we know about this?
Well, China is defiant, but other countries like Japan, like Vietnam, Cambodia, South Korea, they're all signaling they want to negotiate with the U.S., even if the talks are no guarantee of big tariff relief. Japan looks set to get priority after this call between President Trump and Japan's prime minister, who says he's sending a trade team to Washington. They will present a package of measures to try to reduce the 24% tariffs that were levied as part of Liberation Day. And remember, there's also 25% tariffs coming in on cars. The auto sector is a huge pillar of Japan's economy. Japanese firms, some of the biggest investors in the U.S. So the Treasury Secretary is set to lead those talks. Japan is one of America's closest allies and a regional security partner. So moving to the front of the line of countries hoping for a better deal. Savannah.
All right, Janice Mackey-Freyer, thank you very much. Well, now let's get to another story. This morning, the Maryland father who was deported to El Salvador's mega prison after what the Trump administration described as an administrative error must remain behind bars. And now it's unclear when he'll get out. The news comes after the Supreme Court issued an administrative stay in the case yesterday. Now, the ruling temporarily blocks a district judge's previous order requiring the Trump administration to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the U.S. by midnight last night. We have NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalas joining us with more. Danny, good morning. So Trump administration is a little confusing here, calling the Supreme Court's ruling yesterday a victory, even though they had said it was this administrative error. Garcia's attorney is saying that this case is far from over. First, I want to play a little bit of what he told our Kelly O'Donnell immediately after the ruling. We'll talk right after.
This is a temporary administrative stay. It doesn't say how many days or even hours it's going to last, but we have every confidence that the Supreme Court is going to resolve this matter as fast as possible.
Danny, what happens next in this case? What is the likelihood that Garcia is actually returned to the U.S. and when?
The Supreme Court's order here is not a victory. Here's what's happened so far. Just below in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, that court rejected the administration's request to stay or pause the order requiring the government to bring back this person who was removed by 11:59 tonight. Now, this is something that is not a victory. An administrative stay is only saying, hey, we're just going to stop the clock while we read the briefs. We're not saying anybody wins or loses at this point. We just need time. And I suspect that had the district court not issued an order to require the return of Garcia so quickly, you might not have seen the same administrative stay. If the court had said, hey, bring him back in a week or even 72 hours, maybe the Supreme Court might not have issued the stay, but it might be because the requirement was so fast to bring him back that it may not even be feasible to bring someone back from that far away. But make no mistake about it. I don't normally make predictions. But if the government themselves have already conceded that this was a mistake, then it seems like if you're betting, I would bet not on the government on this.
So it's a little bit more like, OK, the 11:59 doesn't matter so much, but the principle still matters.
The principles still matter. And of course, the Supreme Court needs time to look at the briefing. And by the way, they may determine the same thing the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals did, which is that there's no reason to stop this order, although the clock is ticking and the order may expire before the Supreme Court can get to it. And that's why they issue that administrative stay. Again, nobody wins or loses on the administrative stay. It's just saying we need more time to read these briefs, some of which are 100 pages long.
Right. So, okay, so Danny, just if we rewind and back up a little bit, remind viewers, this was all happening. This man ended up in this prison because there was this kind of sweeping roundup of people that were deported under the Alien Enemies Act, which says, you know, essentially we are at war. This country needs to do this using this very old particular law, the Alien Enemies Act. The reasoning in this particular case was that they said that they were deporting members of a particular gang, Tren de Agua. Well, yesterday, related here, a little bit separate decision, but the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that it was okay for the United States to do exactly that. What does that mean for somebody like Garcia? They did say that those who are deported have to have due process. What does that even look like? What's it mean for Garcia?
Right, and that's another problem for the administration, that to the degree that due process is required, notice and a hearing, that doesn't seem to be happening. And the key with Garcia, he's got a very unique fact situation. In fact, he could have been deported, arguably, to almost any other country other than the one he was sent to, because that's what the withholding of removal, the order issued by the immigration judge back in 2019, that's what that order provided. Essentially, you can send him anywhere, just not El Salvador, and that's exactly where the administration sent him, because the immigration judge found in 2019 that he was likely to face some kind of violence or reprisal if sent back to that particular country.
Right. All right. Danny Cevallos, thank you very much. And let's stay on this. Our colleague, NBC News correspondent David Noriega, had a chance to talk with one mother who says her son was wrongfully deported to El Salvador. He's a gay Venezuelan makeup artist who was arrested because of his tattoos, which ICE says prove he is a gang member. However, his family and friends say his ink tells a different story.
A mother in Venezuela speaks out against the deportation and imprisonment of her son, saying she hasn't heard from him in weeks, and she cries wondering about his fate. Andri Hernandez Romero was among the 238 Venezuelans deported without court hearings under the Alien Enemies Act to an infamous mega prison in El Salvador.
So this is a young man that I had followed.
60 Minutes identified Hernandez in these photos taken by an American journalist. Records filed in court by his attorneys show that he had no known criminal record when he entered the U.S. last year to seek asylum over what he described as discrimination for his sexual orientation. However, ICE officials indicated that they suspected him of belonging to a Venezuelan gang solely because of these tattoos. An officer writing, "The crown has been found to be an identifier for a Tren de Aragua gang member." But experts say Tren de Aragua does not use tattoos as markers of membership.
Una bella persona.
And Hernandez's family says his tattoos have an innocent explanation.
Sí.
Hernandez is from a small town with a century-old tradition of staging an elaborate festival for Three Kings Day. Reina Cárdenas is his close childhood friend.
Él es un artista.
She says the festival awakened Hernandez's interest in theater, beauty, and fashion. He often designed costumes and did makeup in addition to acting in the festivities. His tattoos of crowns, she says, are a reference to the Three Kings. Later, Hernandez worked as a makeup artist for a state-run TV station in Caracas, where, according to his lawyers, he suffered discrimination for his identity as a gay man.
Eso nos preocupa inmensamente. De verdad.
His family says the treatment he might receive in prison over his sexual orientation keeps them up at night. The White House did not respond to our request for comment. On X, a DHS spokesperson said Hernandez's social media indicates he's a gang member, but she didn't reference any specific posts, and we found no indication of gang activity on his socials. As attention on the case grows, support for Hernandez coming from some unexpected places, including podcaster Joe Rogan.
Again, that's bad for the cause. Like, the cause is, let's get the gang members out. Everybody agrees. But let's not innocent gay hairdressers get lumped up with the gangs. Is there any plan in place to alert the authorities that they've made a horrible mistake and correct it?
Señor Dios Todopoderoso.
Residents of Hernandez's hometown holding regular vigils to call for his release, many wearing paper crowns. David Noriega, NBC News.
Well, let's change to weather now. Urgent rescues are still ongoing this morning after days of heavy rain and deadly storms that have battered the South and Midwest. Rivers in hard-hit areas are rising to near record levels, including the Ohio River, which crested on Monday, reaching depths not seen since 2018. Now, forecasters are warning that the dangerous flooding may last for days, threatening already waterlogged communities in parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has more from Clarksville, Tennessee, along the Cumberland River.
A slow-motion disaster as widespread flooding swallows more communities across America's Midwest and South.
6 foot of water. This is not standing Tennessee water. This is 6 foot of water.
Authorities in Arkansas and Kentucky announcing 3 more deaths, including a 27-year-old man swept away by floodwaters Sunday, making for 24 people killed by severe weather in the last week. Among them, 9-year-old Gabriel Andrews, also caught in a flash flood while walking to his school bus. Rescues stacking up. The state of Kentucky getting well over 15 inches of rain in 4 days, a new record.
Remember, this event is not over until the waters have receded.
Some already facing that aftermath.
It's hard, but we're managing. We're okay. You okay? I'm okay. I'm okay.
Shaquana Hart escaped her Hopkinsville home swimming through chest-high floodwater Friday. This is the mom of 4's first time back.
What's the first thing you noticed? The damage. Just memories. It's material things. I still have my kids. They're alive.
Devastation in a region already exhausted by days of deadly storms and tornadoes. Dawson Springs, Kentucky, still largely underwater. The police chief showing us the worst of it.
How exhausted are people here?
Very. They're very exhausted, and our community needs help.
And now the federal response to this disaster getting some attention. President Trump, for what it's worth, has signed emergency declarations in several states, including here in Tennessee and in Kentucky. Kentucky's governor said the Trump administration has been very responsive, but also blasted recent cuts to the National Weather Service, saying, quote, they save so many lives. Back to you.
All right, Maggie Vespa, thank you. Well, for more on the flood risks in the wake of these severe storms, let's get a check-in on your morning news now. Weather with meteorologist Angie Lassman. Hi, Angie. Good morning.
Hi, Savannah. Good morning to you. We, of course, as Maggie kind of highlighted, still have this ongoing flood threat happening. And yes, the rain has moved out. That system long gone for most of us, especially the hard-hit areas of the Midwest and the South. But we're still going to see a lot of that water kind of going into the waterways and those flood levels coming up here, especially peaking as we get into Wednesday. Right now, we've got 5 million people under flood alerts. You can see across this same region, flood warnings, flood advisories, and a whole lot of folks dealing with major flood stages across this same region. So Tennessee River, Ohio River, Mississippi, and Arkansas rivers all included in this. Where you see those brighter pinks, those are major flooding stages for the rivers in those locations. The red is that moderate flooding. And again, we're expecting these to peak about Wednesday, but this will be ongoing likely until we get into Saturday before we start to see those receding. There was just so much rain in such a short period of time that water has to have somewhere to go. So we'll continue to watch that. I mentioned the system is out of here. This is kind of the tail end of it that's going to impact folks across Florida today. That means that anyone from essentially Fort Myers to Miami could see some periods of some heavy rain. We likely will see a couple of chances for us to flood. We know it doesn't take a whole lot to see flooding across this region. So a marginal risk from West Palm Beach down to Homestead, including Miami and Fort Lauderdale today, as we deal with some of that kind of lingering rainfall from that same system. That'll be long gone. What's going to stick around, though, are the temperatures that are well below normal. And this morning, getting our attention with these frost and freeze alerts for 55 million people. A lot of the areas that are under these alerts, same areas that have been dealing with the flooding. So you see Paducah, Lexington, we've got St. Louis stretching down to Birmingham included in there. And our temperatures are quite chilly, to say the least. We've got 20s in Des Moines, Rockford, and Indianapolis. Lexington checking in at 29 degrees right now. We've got 40s for Nashville, 30s for Greenville. So running below normal, about 15 to 25 degrees. This is going to really translate into our afternoon temperatures across the east, too. 50s for Richmond. We've got 40s in Boston. Detroit tops out at 41 degrees. The nice temperatures, at least by my standards, 73 degrees in Denver. That sounds pretty good to me. Upper 70s in Amarillo, Savannah. We've got 80s on tap for Texas as we get into tomorrow. So kind of a mixed bag of some warm and some cool temperatures across the East and the West. And then most of our friends in the East will slowly but surely start to rebound. We go from the low 50s on Thursday to the upper 60s in Minneapolis by Saturday. So some milder conditions on the way, but a mixed bag. That's what I'm calling it today.
Oh my gosh, why is it cold here again?
Well, you know, spring, a season of transition.
Oh my gosh, I'm like 40s again?
Take it up with Mother
40s
Nature.
again. Thanks, Angie.
You got it.
All right, as they say in Gainesville, it's great to be a Florida Gator in a thrilling national final to wrap up this year's March Madness tournament. The University of Florida Gators clinched their third basketball title in school history last night. Now, for the third tournament game in a row, the Gators overcame a second-half deficit to complete their incredible comeback against the Houston Cougars in San Antonio. A couple of clutch free throws gave Florida the lead with just under a minute remaining. But it was the Gators' defense that stepped up late, forcing a couple critical turnovers at the end to help them seal the victory. This win marks Florida's first national title since 2007, and this is pretty cool. It makes head coach Todd Golden, he's just 39 years old, the youngest to win the tournament in more than 40 years. We'll have more on that throughout the morning. Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, more dangerous than fiction. A prescription drug now in the spotlight thanks to a hit HBO show. What doctors want you to know about the risks of taking lorazepam. But up first, after the break, more fallout over the killing of more than a dozen rescue workers by Israeli soldiers in Gaza. The new video raising questions about what happened. That's next. Stay with us. We are back now with news out of the Middle East, where Israel is offering a new explanation for the killing of 15 rescue workers by its soldiers in Gaza. In a statement, the IDF claimed that their preliminary investigation indicated that the troops opened fire due to a perceived threat following a previous encounter in the area. What comes after video recovered from one of the victims' cell phones directly contradicts Israel's initial version of events. NBC News International correspondent Matt Bradley has the details and a warning. Some of the footage we're about to show is disturbing.
Israel is doing damage control, pushing ahead with an investigation into the killings of 15 Palestinian rescue workers in late March at the hands of Israeli soldiers. As the Jewish state faces increasing pressure to allow for an independent investigation into the controversial deaths, Israel has had to walk back its initial account of the deadly incident after cell phone video that the Palestine Red Crescent said it found on one of the slain men contradicted its earlier version of events. The IDF had said its soldiers opened fire on vehicles that were advancing suspiciously towards them without warning and without emergency signals. But the new cell phone video shows emergency workers rushing towards a stranded vehicle with their lights on and donning their uniforms. Israel now calling its initial characterization a mistake. Within just seconds, Israeli forces open fire. The camera crashes to the ground. For nearly 5 minutes, it records some of the men's last words. Mom, forgive me. This is the path I chose to help people. And prayers. Until more Israeli soldiers arrive. That footage recovered along with the men's bodies, the Red Crescent says, in a shallow mass grave, where their crushed ambulances were also buried. This surviving medic, Munzar Jihad Nafazabad, saying he was stripped of his clothes and interrogated by one soldier. Abad saying he hit me with his arm, spat on me, insulted me with offensive words. Finally, he threw me on the ground and placed the M16 at the point of my neck, threatening to kill me. Abad said he witnessed the soldiers burying the dead medics and their vehicles with an earth mover. The IDF said the soldiers covered the corpses to prevent them from being eaten by wild animals. Ibrahim Al-Qas, a Palestinian medic, was among the group that made the grisly discovery. Unfortunately, they were executed in close proximity in a brutal manner, he said. The Israeli government still saying its soldiers killed Hamas terrorists in the incident, but providing no evidence.
Hamas have on many occasions, many documented occasions, used ambulances as a cover. What sort of cover? To transport terrorists, to escape from Israel's forces, abusing the very notion of emergency services.
The The White House backing up that sentiment, saying it holds Hamas entirely responsible for the emergency workers' deaths. Nafla Nassasra says her husband Assad was among rescue workers who went missing that day. Unlike the others, his body hasn't been found. I was relieved that he wasn't with them, but I was worried because I don't know his fate, alive or dead, she said. As we say, he was the pillar of the house. He took care of us.
Well, the Israeli military says a deeper investigation will be conducted in the coming days, and its findings would be presented to the public. Well, now let's get to the latest out of Ukraine's capital city, where President Zelensky is confirming rumors about new military advances inside Russia. NBC's Matt Bodner has more on his video address and other news from around the world. Hey, Matt, good morning.
Savannah, good morning. There have been rumors, hints, and speculation now for weeks that Ukrainian forces had crossed over the Russian border in Belgorod region, and now it's official. President Zelensky, in his evening address last night, confirmed Ukrainian forces are active in Belgorod, and they continue to hold some ground in the neighboring Kursk region. Zelensky said the main objective of this push into Belgorod, as well as the ongoing effort to hold ground in Kursk, is to protect Ukraine's Sumy and Kharkiv regions, as well as to compel Russia to pull troops from the front in eastern Ukraine. Russian territory can be a valuable bargaining chip for Ukraine in future negotiations with Russia, as well as the United States. Moving along now to the Philippines. A volcano in central Philippines erupted this morning, with the plume skyrocketing some 2.5 miles up into the sky. The National Seismology Agency has had an alert over this volcano since December, when there was another explosive event. The current warning level is 3 out of 5, and this indicates increased risk of lava flows and risk of a hazardous eruption in the coming weeks. We'll wrap up this hour right here in the UK. Local surgeons are celebrating the UK's first ever successful birth after a womb transplant. The mother is Grace Davidson. She is the recipient of the transplant, and she was born without a uterus. Her sister, Amy, donated her womb during an 8-hour operation back in 2023. Research into this procedure has been ongoing in the UK for more than 2 decades, though it has been performed elsewhere about 100 times now. Grace's child is named Amy Isabel in honor of the sister who donated the womb. She was born by planned C-section on February 27th. Back to you.
Wow, that sounds like a modern miracle. Matt, thank you very much. Well, coming up, new phone, higher price tag. President Trump threatening more tariffs against China, and the cost could get passed down to you. We'll break down the numbers. And it's become an unlikely star of HBO's White Lotus. What doctors want you to know about a popular anxiety pill. The weekly check-in is next here on Morning News Now. Welcome back. President Donald Trump's tariffs could impact the cost of a variety of all kinds of things, including your iPhone. The president's currently proposed tariffs on China total 54%, which could increase the cost of Apple's newest iPhone model by nearly $300. China is one of the world's biggest electronics manufacturers and makes nearly all of the components for an iPhone. Now, analysts say Apple is one of the most exposed companies to a trade war because of its heavy reliance on China for production. For more on this, let's bring in Joanna Stern. She's an NBC News personal technology analyst and senior personal technology columnist at the Wall Street Journal. Joanna, good morning. It's always wonderful to have you with us. Thanks for being here. So I know you spent some time breaking down the practical goal of these tariffs and looked at Apple, because it really is an excellent example here. You write in this column of yours recently, the dream of the Trump tariffs is to bring high-tech manufacturing to the U.S. The reality could be a bajillion-dollar iPhone. I love the way that you put that. Walk us through the cost breakdown of an iPhone, and just whether what you looked at shows that an American-made iPhone, is that realistic at all?
Yeah, no, so I have been digging deep into this. What we did last week was look at the cost of the current iPhone. We actually looked at the iPhone 16 Pro, a 256 gigabyte model. And according to Tech Insights, the bill of materials, everything, the hardware inside that costs around $550, $580 when you sort of talk about assembly and that sort of thing. So that's how much Apple is paying for that phone. And that's kind of what the tariff will be applied to. And so that would bring you up to around, I mean, when you kind of factor in all the things and the China tariff at 54%, that could bring us up to $850, and that would be what Apple was paying. And of course, Apple has a lot of other costs in there, and that's why we end up paying over $1,100 for that phone. And so now the question becomes, who eats that cost? Does Apple eat that cost, or does it pass it on to the consumers? My belief is that Apple's going to try to do everything it can to not make these phones more expensive, but we already are seeing examples of that. We had some reporting reporting in the Journal yesterday that they're bringing in phones from India where the tariff might be less. But as we've seen, many people are going out buying iPhones because they're panicked. They're worried that the phone price may increase.
And Joanna, do you think that that's a good move? Like, what's your advice for people who are concerned about this? Is it buy an iPhone now if you're close to needing one?
If you need one, if you were saying, you know what, I was going to buy an iPhone next month, sure, go out and get it. But if you're thinking, I might need an iPhone next year, I do not think that's a smart move. Let's wait and see what happens. I think, look, we are going to see some of this incremental pricing. We may see that with the next iPhone, just regardless. But also, we just have so many unknowns right now around the tariffs. We don't know if Apple will get an exemption like they did in the last administration. We don't know how, we just don't know what is going to happen. It's very volatile right now.
All right, Joanna Stern, really good look at something that people use every day, people buy every day. We appreciate it. Thank you. Well, speaking of the tariffs, as they take effect, the cost of more than half of all groceries you buy at the supermarket is expected to go up. And that could, of course, have an impact on our mental health. Also, we've been talking about this as White Lotus Season 3 wraps up. People are talking about the shocking ending, of course, but also about lorazepam, the antidepressant that one of the characters, a couple of the characters really, frequently use. These are just some of the topics we're covering today in our weekly check-in. Let's bring in our friend, Dr. George James, licensed marriage and family therapist. Dr. James, always great to have you with us. So let's start on lorazepam. If you watch this show, it was basically like a supporting character here between one of the characters taking it, then it goes missing because actually her husband steals it, is taking it constantly. He's like out of it the whole trip. So we know why it's popular right now because it's being talked about from a show that everybody's watching. But what should we know about this? What should you caution us on?
You know, like any medication, lorazepam can have its side effects, and it can also be very, we can get to the place where we're very dependent. And the reason why people use it is because it can help with short-term anxiety, including panic attacks, folks who are overwhelmed by maybe flying or getting an MRI. And we want to use it in that way. But what we want to do first is use antidepressants and therapy. This is like the last resort if you can't really work through the anxiety or if it's too overwhelming. So even though we see it on TV, we don't want to use it that way. We want to first consult our doctor and use other treatments before we get to lorazepam, which is also known as Ativan.
Very interesting stuff there. Okay, doctor, I also want to talk about this one I mentioned a moment ago. It's a gear shift here to food insecurity, because right now, an estimated 13% of Americans are experiencing that in the rural South. In fact, that number jumps up to nearly half. And this is only expected to get worse. Things are just supposed to get tougher as the cost of food goes up due to tariffs right now. Explain to us what food insecurity means and how it impacts mental health.
Yeah, Savannah, food insecurity has actually been something that many Americans have been dealing with for a long time. And it's where you might not be able to afford food or might not be able to afford nutritious food. You're limited between access as well as your funds. And now if foods increase, that can mean more people might not be able to afford the foods that they need. And not being able to have the foods, nutritious foods or good quality food can impact your mental health, your physical health, your well-being. Also just feeling hungry, or might even increase disordered eating. So there's a lot of impact that can happen that we really need to think about people and what they're experiencing.
Staying with families, doctor, a lot of times postpartum depression, when we think about that, which honestly we don't think or talk about enough, but we think of the mother. This is kind of interesting. A new study found that actually between 8 and 13% of new dads can also suffer from it. This is a little confusing to me just because what I know about postpartum is how much the hormones of a new mom impacts that, and this major fluctuation from when you're growing a baby to once you have the baby. What does this look like for men? How's it possible? Are the symptoms the same?
You know, the treatment and symptoms are actually the same. And this is what I would probably call breaking news. Dads, too, feel. They have emotions, and they can also deal with postpartum depression. I mean, we've seen dads gain weight, just like moms might. And also they can feel, sometimes it can increase in decisiveness, lack of emotions, lack of connection. And it's important that we really focus on this and treat dads and support them with a postpartum depression because it is real.
All right, Dr. George James, who knew? Thank you very much. Good to see you. Well, coming up, Meta rolling out restrictions for some of its youngest users when we return the company's latest efforts to protect teens from harmful content. And she went from early investor to executive of a multi-billion-dollar company. We'll talk to the CEO of Too Good To Go about her successes and her setbacks in our latest edition of Women Mean Business. Morning News Now. We'll be right back. We are back with some money headlines. Meta is expanding its teen account restrictions. CNBC's Silvana Henao has more details on that and some other money news for us. Hey, Silvana, good morning.
Savannah, good morning to you. So Meta is rolling out teen accounts to Facebook and Messenger as it responds to criticism about not doing enough to protect younger users online. So this enhanced privacy and parental controls, they were introduced on Instagram last year. Meta says teens under 16 will require permission from their parents before they can go live and disable a feature that automatically blurs nude and other questionable images in direct messages. So the Senate advanced 2 online safety bills last year to force social media companies to take responsibility for how platforms affect children. Prices for used Teslas are dropping faster than other electric vehicles, but the Financial Times reports the decline seems to be driven primarily by a glut of leased cars coming onto the market versus backlash to CEO Elon Musk's position with the Trump administration. Data from online marketplace Car Gurus shows prices for used Teslas fell 7% in March versus a 1.5% decline for other brands. And we all scream for free ice cream, right? Well, it's free cone day at Ben & Jerry's. The company has been giving away free ice cream to customers every year since it was established in 1979. You can redeem the offer for a free scoop at any participating Ben & Jerry's shop today from 12 to 8 p.m. local time.
All right, there you go. Oh, gosh, there's always a huge line for that because we have one downstairs at 30, right?
Yeah, I know, always a huge line, but it's free, so.
There you go. Silvana, thank you. Yeah. Well, now it's time for our ongoing series, Women Mean Business. And today's guest turned a global waste issue into a $2 billion app, Too Good To Go. It allows users to buy leftover food from local businesses at discounted prices, seriously discounted prices. Metaluca took the reins about 9 years ago, and now the app is used by millions of people across 19 countries. Here's some of her story.
Metaluca grew up in Denmark, surrounded by nature and community, both of which she says fundamentally shaped her values and principles. So it's no surprise she ended up as CEO of Too Good To Go, a company that, together with its users and partners, has saved more than 400 million meals from going to waste around the globe. Meta started her first job when she was just 12 years old. Then a few years later, she made her very first investment in the stock market as a teenager. That investment would eventually allow her to launch her very first company. But first, she honed her skills in university, where she studied political science with a focus on global systems, policies, and social change. She got her start as a consultant with the firm McKinsey & Company before leaving to become a full-time entrepreneur. In 2007, Meta launched her first company, Endomondo, which is a fitness tracking platform and social network. Then in 2015, she sold Endomondo to Under Armour for $85 million. The following year, she became an investor of the then startup Too Good To Go, and within months of joining the team, she took over as the app's CEO. She says that Too Good To Go isn't just a business, it's a movement committed to making the world a more sustainable place, one meal at a time. Metaluca is a woman who means business.
And I'm so excited to have Metaluca here in studio this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about this in just a minute, but I just so happen to personally be a fan of Too Good To Go. So I'm so excited to have you here today. I want to start, though, just on the fact that a little thing we said in there. You started investing as a teenager, and it was actually that money that helped you kind of get a business off the ground. Tell me about having that business sense when you were so young.
Well, I will say I think my father was a good influence in that sense, but he was quite keen that we shouldn't just let the money sit there. And everything we earned, we kind of put in, and he helped us pick out some stocks.
And it was that type of thing that then led to you having money to be investing in a business.
Yes. When I first started a company, I went for 2 years without any pay, so it came in handy at that time.
Absolutely. Okay, and then enter Too Good To Go. So for people who don't know, just explain what it is and how it works.
Yeah, Too Good To Go is an app that helps food outlets save the food that would otherwise go to waste. So as a consumer, it basically allows you to go and save and pick up the surplus food, and you get a great value.
A great value?
Great value, yes.
Which is hugely important, especially at this time. I'll ask you about that in just a moment. So like I said, I use the app. We have it here in New York City. What you could do is you can go on there, and it's like it's restaurants that everybody's probably heard of, even if you've just visited New York. Italy, there's like this trendy bagel spot, Black Seed Bagels, and you can go on there, and basically by the afternoon when they know, hey, we're not selling this food, we're not using this food, instead of throwing it away, it can be yours. Is that right?
Yes, correct. You look at the app, you find your favorite places. We work with chains like Whole Foods Market, Krispy Kreme, Italy, Blue Bottle Coffee, many others, and individual more boutique stores. So you open up the app, you see what you like, you reserve it, and then you go and pick it up, usually at the time they're closing for the day.
And I'm saying it's like $5, and I remember one time I got like 12 bagels, a bunch of cream cheese, like from an amazing bagel place here in New York City. It really is prices that are just completely slashed.
Yeah, typically you will pay, say, $4.99 for $15 worth of food.
And sometimes it's like a surprise bag, right? And it can be like also from somewhere like you mentioned, Whole Foods, it's like a surprise bag of groceries.
Yes, the concept is a surprise bag. Because food waste is unpredictable, the store won't know what they're going to have left by the end of the day. So that's what you kind of buy into as a consumer. But we also find that consumers actually really love that surprise. And for $5, most people are willing to gamble a little bit. And they actually really enjoy seeing what they're going to get. And they start exchanging recipes and figuring out, now that I've saved this food, how do I actually make sure I also eat it?
Absolutely. Tell us about the issue of global food waste, just how prevalent it is, and how this, honestly, it's something that feels good for yourself. It feels good for your wallet. It is kind of fun to get a surprise, but you really are chipping away at a bigger issue.
Yes, we are. So we think of it as a win-win-win concept. It's good for the stores. They make money on the food they would otherwise throw away. It's good for the consumers, and you just talked about increasing food prices again. And it's good for the planet. So 40% of all food goes to waste. It never makes it to human consumption.
Wow.
And it's 10% of greenhouse gas emissions that are estimated to come from food waste. So it's a massive, massive issue. And here we can actually do something about it in a fun way, where it also helps us get affordable food on the table.
You're in 45 U.S. cities so far?
45 U.S. cities, yeah, with plans to expand to another 24 this year. So we're expanding quite massively now.
So most major cities across the U.S., would you say?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, check it out. Too good to go. Also, in this segment, we always love to ask women like yourself who have just made these incredible strides in business. And in this case, it's so neat that you're also doing something that's good for the world, good for the environment, for a little bit of advice for a woman who's listening right now who maybe has an idea, doesn't know how to get it off the ground, somebody who wants to make a difference and feels like it's too hard to. What advice would you give them?
I think you should start a company if you have something where you really feel like, I can make a difference here. And that passion needs to be very extraordinary. There will be times where that's the only thing holding you up. So start something. And for me, that is social impact. It's tech for good is what I'm passionate about. And I think getting that to then scale is very fulfilling.
Tech for good. That is so neat. Metaluca, thank you so much for being in the studio with us this morning.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the success of Too Good To Go. And again, check it out. It is expanding, maybe coming to your city. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, coming up, a forever home for a few flightless birds. Up next, we'll take you inside a Boston aquarium that's working to make the golden years great for its older penguin population. Stay with us. This is Morning News Now. Finally, this hour, we're shipping up to Boston to visit a so-called aquatic retirement home that's caring for penguins. In the wild, the older Arctic birds are endangered due to population and climate change. But now, thanks to a little geriatric island at the New England Aquarium, they can live happier and healthier. NBC's Ann Thompson gives us a closer look.
This is a fast crowd. African penguins, the party animals of the New England Aquarium. But some are ready for a slower pace.
So this is Geriatric Island?
That's it, yes. This is the area we would like to call the retirement home or assisted living community.
Eric Fox is the human in charge. Separated by a mesh barrier from the younger set, the new island has flat spaces for older birds with arthritis or foot issues.
Hi, buddy. Lambo.
There's medical care, like eye drops for vision problems. And mealtime.
There you go. There you go.
Nice job.
Specially prepared fish are stuffed with vitamins or medicines, according to each resident's needs.
How many fish do they eat?
It's really up to them. Yeah. They're able to eat as many or as little fish as they want. All we simply do is record exactly what every penguin is eating.
There are 3 couples on the island, most in their 20s and 30s. They mate for life. And now there's a new couple, 35-year-old Good Hope, the oldest penguin, and his wife, St. Croix.
You can do the honors of opening up the carrier door and just swing it towards you and let them do whatever they're going to do.
Good Hope and St. Croix, welcome to your new home. Oh, no, St. Croix first.
In the wild, these penguins are endangered by pollution and climate change. Here, half of the 40 penguins will exceed their life expectancy of 15 years.
The longer they live, the more we learn from them, and we're learning from these animals every single day.
Penguins of a certain age, teaching and delighting people of all ages. Ann Thompson, NBC News, Boston.
Okay, that was some good news we all needed. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but stay with us. The news continues right now. Good morning. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday. I'm Savannah Sellers. Joe's off today. Right now on Morning News Now, sounding the alarm. President Trump's tariff tirade drawing ire on both Main Street and Wall Street after a whirlwind few days of trading. Nearly 3/4 of CEOs now expecting a recession, according to new numbers from CNBC. And the commander-in-chief isn't taking his foot off the gas, even with blowback from his own party. So how might all this affect average Americans in the coming months? Well, you may not be thinking about the holidays just yet, but big business leaders are already warning of price hikes on popular gifts. We're watching your wallet. Plus, Gator glory, Florida's comeback kids strike again with a stunner of a March Madness victory over Houston last night, clinching their first national championship in nearly 20 years. We've got all the highlights as the Sunshine State once again wakes up as kings of the big dance. And it may sound like something straight out of Game of Thrones. The humble Direwolf, not seen in thousands of years, now coming back to life, sort of, in an amazing new de-extinction process that you will have to see and hear for yourself. We are going to begin this hour, though, with the ongoing economic and financial fallout of President Trump's trade tariffs. This morning, U.S. stock futures are pointing to a positive open following days of heavy losses in global markets. Now, despite that, tensions between the U.S. and China continue to mount, while more business leaders are warning the trade war is bringing us closer to a recession. NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans has the latest.
Hey there. After days of turmoil, the markets stabilized slightly on Monday, but it was still another tumultuous day of trading, with the Dow declining in the end for the 3rd straight day. And now several top Wall Street leaders are warning of a potential recession and price hikes.
After another chaotic day on Wall Street, America's CEOs are sounding the alarm, warning that the U.S. economy could soon take a big hit after President Trump's sweeping tariff announcement sent markets spinning.
The economy is weakening as we speak. Most CEOs I talk to would say we are probably in a recession right now.
A new CNBC survey showing those concerns are widespread, with 69% of CEOs expecting a recession and 82% expecting resurgent inflation. The Dow swinging 2,600 points Monday, the most ever in a single day, closing down more than 300. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon telling shareholders the situation is one large additional straw on the camel's back. Pershing Square CEO Bill Ackman, a Trump supporter, warning we're heading for a self-induced economic nuclear winter. And Virgin's Richard Branson tweeting yesterday, this is the moment to own up to a colossal mistake and change course. Otherwise, America will face ruin for years to come. But despite those fears, President Trump not backing down.
We're going to get fair deals and good deals with every country. And if we don't, we're going to have nothing to do with them.
Some consumers already rethinking the way they buy.
I take a lot of hand-me-downs, and we also go to the dollar store.
One retail group estimating sneakers made in places like Vietnam could soon cost Americans an additional $50 to $75 more per pair. And now Nintendo announcing a delay of its highly anticipated gaming system.
I'm not spending $600 on a Nintendo Switch 2.
The National Association of Wine Retailers also bracing for fallout, with wines from Europe set to be taxed at 20%.
One major player not looking to play games this morning, China, warning just hours ago it will fight to the end if Trump continues to make threats like an additional 50% tariff, which means there could be a 104% tax on Chinese imports if they all go into effect. Back to you.
All right, Christine, thank you. Well, President Trump continues, of course, to face political fallout here at home on these proposed tariffs to other nations. This comes as China vows to, quote, fight to the end after the president threatened to implement that additional tariff this weekend on Chinese goods. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander joins us from Washington with this one. Peter, good morning.
Savannah, good morning. 6 more Senate Republicans have now signed up in support of a bipartisan effort to rein in the president's effort to unilaterally slap tariffs on foreign countries. But the White House has already made clear that they will veto that bill if it ever passes. And President Trump, he remains undeterred, Savannah, in his commitment to what most economists warn is a risky tariff game right now, arguing that any member of his party who backs down from the president's trade war is, quote, weak and stupid. With President Trump's next round of escalatory tariffs set to go into effect at midnight, the president insists that despite rattled markets and recession fears, he's not considering hitting the pause button.
We're not looking at that.
After the president initially said every country has called to negotiate, President Trump's top advisors are now saying more than 50 countries have reached out. European officials offered to eliminate their tariffs on American-made cars and industrial goods if the U.S. will do the same in return. Despite the market suffering their worst days since the start of the pandemic, the president says he's unfazed by short-term financial pain.
I don't mind going through it because I see a beautiful picture at the end.
Administration officials have also been saying Americans will overlook temporary market turmoil.
Americans who have put away for years in their savings accounts, I think they don't look at the day-to-day fluctuations of what's happening.
But many may be invested. Research from the Federal Reserve shows more than half of American households own stock directly or through investment funds. Top Democrats say the president's tariffs are a self-inflicted wound.
Less than a week after Donald Trump started the largest, dumbest trade war in American history, all the signs say America is heading towards calamity.
For now, most Republicans are standing by President Trump.
And I think you got to give the president the latitude, the runway to do what it is he was elected to do.
Still, there are cracks emerging within the president's party.
If the outcome from these tariffs is really high tariffs from every country on earth against American goods and really high tariffs from America against goods from every other country on earth, that is going to be really bad for Texas and really bad for America.
Of course, that was Texas Senator Ted Cruz there. Also this morning, the Washington Post is reporting that Elon Musk, one of President Trump's top lieutenants, who this weekend launched a barrage on social media with posts criticizing President Trump's aggressive tariff plan, also made personal appeals to rethink the tariffs, making those appeals directly to President Trump. The Post cites 2 people familiar with the matter on that. Of course, Musk's efforts, Savannah, so far have not been successful.
All right, Peter, thank you very much. Well, speaking of Musk, his Department of Government Efficiency is setting its sights on a new project upgrading the federal retirement systems. Now, for decades, retirement requests have been handled entirely on paper out of an old limestone mine, seriously, in Pennsylvania. NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Hake got an exclusive look inside the old-fashioned operation.
Buried deep inside this mine in western Pennsylvania is a little-known government office that handles a critical mission for the federal workforce, now set to be overhauled by the Department of Government Efficiency.
From the mine entrance, which they call the portal, we took some golf carts a few hundred feet down into the mine. You can feel the air change when you get inside, and you can see this is all just roughly cut out of the limestone. This was once a limestone mine. And down here, this is where we find the OPM office, where a few hundred federal employees process all retirement paperwork for the entire federal government.
It's an analog operation, all done on paper. It can take months for the Office of Personnel Management to process a case, potentially delaying retiree benefits.
The facility has literally miles of files, some 26,000 filing cabinets filled with retirement paperwork, some of them stacked 10 high.
Matt McIsaac runs the day-to-day operations inside.
When you look out over all of this, what do you see?
I see people.
I see careers, I see service.
And like, what do you mean a mine?
When Elon Musk brought up the mine in an Oval Office appearance back in February as a target ripe for reform, McIsaac agreed.
He's right. We have to improve the way that we do things for federal employees and for the American public.
Musk asked billionaire Airbnb co-founder Joe Gebbia to take on the project of modernizing not just the mine's operation, but the entire retirement system.
When you look at a project like this, where do you even start?
Well, how about here on file cabinet 56?
Gebbia says Doge engineers are working to create a fully digital experience, with federal retirees the hopeful, happy customers.
Why can't we have an Apple Store-like experience in the government, where you have great user experience, beautiful design, and up-to-date software?
Aiming to upgrade a process long seemingly set in stone. Garrett Hake, NBC News, Boyers, Pennsylvania.
Truly a fascinating look. You almost don't believe it till you see it. Well, this morning, millions of Americans are waking up to widespread flooding in communities across the South and Midwest. At least 24 people have died in the storm so far, and the water in some regions is still expected to rise through the end of the week. NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra joins us from Clarksville, Tennessee with more on this. Marissa, good morning.
Savannah, good morning. If you can believe it, this behind me, this is a neighborhood. And there's a reason why this yellow tape here is preventing us from getting any closer, because if you were to look over there, you might be able to see those are mailboxes. So that just shows you how high this water level still is. And even though we're not expecting any rain right here today, because of the way that river flooding works, the threat in the region far from over.
A flood disaster swelling overnight as rising water overwhelms southern and midwestern communities.
The floodwaters is the worst that I've ever seen in my 20-plus years here.
It's a race against time for emergency crews, seen using every resource they have to evacuate this Louisville, Kentucky hotel, loading luggage on construction vehicles and hotel guests on rafts. The National Guard in high water vehicles specialized for the flood zones. Cities and towns remain underwater across Kentucky and Tennessee, swallowing these cars in this neighborhood. Homeowners here, after their second flood in 2 months, fed up and fearful.
You fear rain now. You see thunderstorms, the wind pick up. You just worry about this coming again. So you can't live. It's hard to live.
Now the region's relentless rain has ended, but not the threat it leaves behind.
Remember, this event is not over until the waters have receded, until the areas that have flooded are fully dry.
Mother of four, Shaquana Hart, returning to her home in Hopkinsville, Kentucky with NBC's Maggie Vespa. Her first time stepping inside since the waters first started rising outside on Friday. The reality washing over her.
You take a step at a time, and you get through it.
A frenzy shared across the flood zone.
At the time, you don't really think about the emotions. You're just in that mindset of, we got to get this done, hurry up and get out of here.
Now the damage in dollars and cents to cities, to the homes, cars like that you see over there, that will take time to assess. But this weather system has already cost at least 24 people their lives. We know that President Trump has approved emergency declarations for the states of Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee, where we are. But Savannah, as you can see behind me, this threat is not only not over at the moment, but it's going to take a while for these communities to recover. And that's only after the water levels recede. Savannah?
Just so dramatic to see. Smart to point out that mailbox. Marissa Parra, stay safe. Thank you very much. Well, let's get a closer look at the effects of days of severe storms with your morning news now. Whether we have Angie Lastman in studio with us. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hi, Savannah. Good morning to you. Just as Marissa said, it's going to take a little while for us to see some improvements. So no surprise that we once again are waking up to some of these flood alerts across this region. Specifically, 5 million people across parts of the Midwest are dealing with those flood warnings and flood advisories. And as we get into tomorrow, we'll likely start to see these rivers cresting. A lot of them already at moderate flood stages. Plenty of them at major flood stages where you see those brighter pink dots across much of this area. This will likely last through Saturday. The worst of it, again, the cresting is expected into Wednesday, but through the rest of your work week, we're going to continue to see all of that water with nowhere to go into those waterways, dealing with the flood stages elevated here across that region. Now, the good news is we've got this system that has worked out. It, yes, caused days and days of inundating rain, and that is on the way out. But we still have a little bit of rain left over from the tail end of it, and that's going to focus across the Sunshine State today, specifically anywhere from Port St. Lucie to points south of Miami. That's where you'll see periods of heavy rain stretching over to Fort Myers and across to Miami as well. So a potential for a bit of flash flooding across that region. Marginal risk right now, West Palm Beach down to Homestead, including Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Big picture look of your temperatures. It is chilly out there, and we've got plenty of alerts to prove it. 55 million people under these frost and freeze alerts. Some of these locations, same spots that are dealing with the flooding, and you're waking up in places like Nashville to 39 degrees. We've got 30s in St. Louis, 20s for Indianapolis, Des Moines, Rockford, 30 for Lexington, even Charleston getting out the door this morning into the mid-30s. By afternoon, a bit of improvement. We'll head to the 40s for Lexington and the 50s for Memphis. Nicer temperatures out west across parts of the Rockies where we're into the 70s and running above normal. Now, some warm and some cool here as we get into tomorrow, too. So the eastern half of the country, really east of the Midwest, you'll see temperatures below normal. So some 40s, some 50s for Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, and Indianapolis. But the 70s and 80s on tap across the plains, specifically 86 degrees in Lubbock today. Tomorrow. So the milder conditions will settle in for folks there. It'll eventually rebound across the Great Lakes in the Midwest. We'll see temperatures back to those upper 60s on Thursday in St. Louis, and then mid-60s by the time we roll into the weekend there.
Oh, gosh, just warmer in New York, please.
I'll see what I can do.
It's time. Yeah, you work on that, Angie. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Well, the Florida Gators are the new champions of college basketball. In a nail-biting end to this year's March Madness tournament, the Gators stormed back from 12 points down against the Houston Cougars to win their third NCAA title. NBC News correspondent Sam Brockle is there for the big game and the even bigger comeback. Sam, good morning.
Yeah, Savannah, good morning. Look, for weeks, this NCAA tournament was kind of just, steady as she goes, a lot of predictability. This Final Four was anything but. Everyone in this building was stunned last night. It certainly looked like Houston was on its way to the first title the program has ever won. But no, these Florida Gators were down by 9+ points in the second half, just like they were, Savannah, against Auburn and Texas Tech. No team in the last 20+ years has been in that scenario and won a title, but these Gators pulled it off.
From this resilient Florida squad, it couldn't have happened any other way. The Gators swallowing up their largest deficit of the entire tournament, enforcing a turnover in the waning moments, claiming their first title in almost 2 decades, and denying Houston history in a come-from-behind nail-biter.
We did what we did all year. We stayed the course. The Gators are natty, baby. We got the natty, baby. We got the natty. Let's go!
Star guard Walter Clayton Jr. scoring all 11 of his points in the second half. But his most clutch moment coming on the defensive end, swarming Houston's Emmanuel Sharp and preventing a possible game-winning shot with just seconds on the clock.
Man, it's a feeling I can't even explain, man. I can't wait to. I love you, Mom. I can't wait to see my mama, man. Mama, I love you, girl.
The Cougars didn't make it easy, keeping Florida in check for almost the entire game with rim-rocking dunks and back-breaking threes. But Florida senior Will Richard helped to keep the dream alive with a slew of three-pointers. To Elijah Martin, making critical free throws to give Florida their lead.
The 2 free throws that you hit, biggest free throws of your life?
Definitely. Biggest free throws of my life, biggest moment of my life, and I'm super proud.
Of course, for legendary Houston coach Kelvin Sampson, it was heartbreak for a team that's been consistently excellent since he arrived a decade ago.
I'm just going through those last 2 possessions more than anything else. It's incomprehensible in that situation. We couldn't get a shot.
I'm high on championship right now.
Overnight, the Gators celebrating where else? San Antonio's Riverwalk, their place in history now complete.
Now, that's a scene that I would have liked to have seen last night, Savannah. Unfortunately, we did have to actually go to bed. Todd Golden, the 39-year-old coach for the Florida Gators, becomes the youngest coach to win a national title since Jimmy Valvano back in 1983 with NC State. And I want to show you something with Walter Clayton Jr., the star for the Florida Gators. In the moments after they win the national championship, check out this video. He's hugging Emmanuel Sharp, who had just fumbled that ball and lost Houston their chances of potentially winning the game. That is sportsmanship. That's what basketball is all about, and just an incredibly powerful moment that we're so glad that we got to witness, Savannah.
Oh, gosh, absolutely. What an amazing image. Sam Brock, thank you so much. Well, we are lucky to be joined now by one of college basketball's newest national champions with the Gators, Thomas Haug. Thomas, good morning. Thank you very much for getting up early and talking to us after what I assume was a night of celebration. You're waking up a national champion today. Has it sunk in yet?
No, it hasn't, man. This has been incredible, and this journey this team is on so far has been awesome.
And it was awesome for all of us to see, just as Sam pointed out there, like such an exciting end to a tournament that had been somewhat predictable, which is typically unpredictable when it comes to this tournament. But take us inside the locker room at halftime. You're down at that point just by a bit, but then obviously in this second half, ultimately down by 12 points at one point. What was the conversation like that kind of brought you guys back?
Coach just got us back online and got us back focused. You know, we leaned a lot on him this year when we were down at deficits like that, this tournament especially. And we also leaned on our leaders to come in there and just give us motivation to go out there in the second half and perform like we did this whole tournament.
And then in that second half, right up at the end, just the defense from your team was incredible. Did you feel at the time during the game just how strong y'all were?
Yeah, definitely felt like we were putting together some stops. But, you know, once you're out there playing, sometimes I was just going with the game and going with the feel. And, you know, at the end there, I just couldn't wait for that buzzer to end when the ball was going around there, bouncing around.
I want to ask you also, because you had this run of comebacks in the tournament this year. You guys always found a way to turn things around late and then pull out a win. What's your secret there?
I don't know. I was telling a reporter earlier that we like to keep the fans interested. You know, we like to keep the game close. But yeah, I just think this team's super resilient and really, really gritty group of guys. And you know, it showed out there in the court today. We were able to cut down nets here.
Yeah, that's true. We got keep everybody on their toes and nail biter every time. You mentioned a moment ago your coach and kind of the way he did speak to y'all at halftime. And Sam also just told us a second ago how neat it is. I mean, just 39 years old, youngest coach in a really long time to win. What's your relationship like with him? What's your team's relationship like with him?
I mean, Coach Golden's the guy. He comes into practice, and I tell everybody he's such a player's coach. And he'll come in there to shoot around with us, do drills, hop in like 3v3s and stuff like that. And he just relates to us a lot just because how young he is. And, you know, I think that kind of built our team chemistry up a lot this year. And, you know, it helped us be able to get this championship.
Later this afternoon, I know you're going to be welcomed back to campus with a championship rally. What are you most looking forward to heading back to school as a national champion?
I'm just looking forward to seeing the fans. You know, the city of Gainesville deserved a champion here in the last couple of years, and you know, basketball got one, and now it's football's turn too. The next couple of years too.
Thomas Haug, congratulations! Thank you so much for joining us again. I know it's an early morning after what I'm sure was a long night. We appreciate it. We're so happy for you.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Well, there's much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now. A little later, we're diving back into your money with a closer look at how President Trump's tariffs could impact your holiday shopping. It's only a few months away. But first, after the break, high-stakes nuclear talks on tap between the U.S. and Iran this weekend. Announced alongside Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, but why now? And how's Iran reacting? We'll bring you the latest next. Welcome back. We are following developing news this morning out of the Dominican Republic. At least a dozen people are dead after a roof caved in at a packed nightclub. NBC's Matt Bodner is following that and other world headlines for us. Hi, Matt. Good morning.
Savannah, good morning. At least 13 people are dead and 93 hospitalized following a roof collapse at a nightclub in the Dominican Republic. The incident took place at the Jet Set nightclub in Santo Domingo, while patrons of the club crowded the dance floor. Rescue efforts are currently underway, and there are signs of life beneath the rubble. Moving along now to the United Kingdom, the estranged prince, Harry, has arrived in London for another court case. This time he's fighting to maintain the level of state-funded police protection that he receives when visiting the UK. There is a committee that decides who gets such protection and to what extent, and in 2020, they downgraded his protection levels when he stepped down as a working member of the royal family. Harry then sued the Home Office in 2021, went to court in 2023, and last year, the claim was dismissed. This is now his second attempt to appeal the ruling. We'll wrap up this hour at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, located in the middle of nowhere, Kazakhstan. This is Russia's primary space launch facility, going back to the days of the Soviet Union. Earlier today, NASA astronaut Johnny Kim and 2 Russian cosmonauts launched in a Soyuz spacecraft for a mission to the International Space Station. The capsule docked at the station just a few hours later. NASA used to pay a hefty sum for Soyuz seats, but in recent years, the advent of U.S. commercial vehicles has altered that relationship. The two sides now trade seats on an equal basis to keep the cruise international. Savannah.
All right, Matt Bodner, thank you very much. Well, President Trump has announced the U.S. will hold direct talks with the Iranian regime on Saturday about its nuclear program. He made this announcement during a press conference yesterday alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, Mr. Trump warned Iranians about potential consequences if the talks fail to persuade the country to abandon its nuclear weapons program.
Doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. Hopefully those talks will be successful, and I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful.
For more, let's bring in NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley. He's in Tel Aviv for us. Matt, good morning. So U.S. and Iranian negotiators, they haven't actually spoken face-to-face since the U.S. pulled out of the Iran nuclear accord, and that was back in 2018 during President Trump's first term. Why are these talks set to start up again now, and what have we heard from Iran on this?
Well, it looks as though, Iran has said that this is more of a demand than something that they're actually going to be doing. Iran has said that they're willing to talk, and they've said that they are going to be speaking with the U.S. on Saturday, but they're going to be doing that indirectly. This is going to be happening in Amman, Jordan, and they've said that they are not into these direct talks necessarily. They want to see indirect talks, and we heard this from the foreign minister of Iran, and this is, something that they kind of see as bullying, but at the same time, it looks as though the Iranians are very in favor of continuing with actual direct talks. Now, why this is happening now? Well, this is something that the Trump administration has long championed, speaking to everybody, reaching out, and getting to another deal on a nuclear arrangement with the Iranians, the same kind of deal, but probably one that's less favorable to Iran that he withdrew from back in 2018.
Matt, also yesterday we mentioned that conversation that began when he was with Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. They also said that they discussed trade, though Netanyahu left without a commitment from the U.S. to remove the newly imposed 17% tariff on imports of Israeli goods. What came out of their meeting? Do we expect negotiation here?
Yeah, we don't really know exactly what's going to be happening there. That was ostensibly the whole point why Netanyahu made this really hastily planned trip. And in fact, it was a couple of days before Trump announced these new tariffs last week to the entire world that Netanyahu and his government, his right-wing cabinet, decided to really lift a lot of the sanctions that Israel had been imposing on the U.S. in preparation for what they may have thought was going to be favorable treatment by the Trump administration when it came to these tariffs. Now, remember, Israel is a very powerful but a small economy, and it could be really badly affected by these 17% tariffs. It does a lot of trade with the United States. There's a lot of connections between Israel and the Americans. The fact is, we haven't heard that deal. It looks as though Netanyahu, and we don't know the details yet because there's something that could have been happening behind closed doors. It looks as though Netanyahu has gone home empty-handed.
Matt, while I've got you, I do want to ask something else here, a story that you have been covering closely. It's an investigation into the killing of 15 Palestinian rescue workers in Gaza by Israeli soldiers. Now, Israel walked back its original claim. They had said that they opened fire on vehicles that were advancing suspiciously toward them without warning, without emergency signals. Well, now that walking back, it seems it has come because of this recently surfaced cell phone video we are showing on your screen right now. It shows emergency workers rushing towards a stranded vehicle with their lights on and wearing their uniforms. What is Israel saying about this, and do we think there's going to be an independent investigation of any type?
Well, the Israelis have been saying that this was actually a mistake, that they were mistaken in their original portrayal of this event. But this is a worsening scandal for the Israelis. There's growing calls, especially from Palestinians and from international journalist rights groups, saying that they want to see an independent investigation. And the last we heard from the Israelis last night was that they are launching their own investigation to more thoroughly examine what actually happened. But we heard from the Israelis saying that this original ambulance that had been shot at did contain militants. They've variously said that all of the 15 rescue workers who were killed included somewhere between 6 to 9 members of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They have offered no evidence of that so far. So as we're seeing the Israelis continuing to make statements and international advocacy organizations continue to poke holes in their argument, we're seeing a lot of pressure piling on Israel to launch some sort of independent investigation that would mollify the families of those who were killed.
All right, Matt Bradley, we know you will stay on that for us. Thanks for covering it all this morning. Well, coming up, back to life when we return, the amazing new de-extinction efforts that are breathing new life literally into an animal not seen for thousands of years. And it might look a little familiar to Game of Thrones fans. Stick around, we'll explain next. We are back now with an incredible scientific feat. A Dallas-based biotech company says it has been able to resurrect the long-extinct direwolf. That's the animal made famous on Game of Thrones. And it's all done through a process called de-extinction. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz. Liz, this is just simply amazing. Good morning.
Hey, Savannah, it really is. Good morning. I know it sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, right? But I promise it's not. The scientists use extremely advanced genetic editing technologies to recreate the direwolf's genome, or at least something they say is very close to it. The company says this is the first time they've ever brought extinct species back to life, and that their goal is to help make extinction a thing of the past.
It's an animal that hasn't existed for some 13,000 years. The direwolf, made famous on the television series Game of Thrones.
It's a direwolf. There are no direwolves south of the wall.
No, there are 5. But the long extinct species now making global headlines for a new reason. A Dallas-based biotech company saying they've resurrected the giant Ice Age wolf, essentially bringing it back to life through a process called de-extinction.
Colossal is the world's first de-extinction company, and our goal is to make extinction a thing of the past.
Colossal says they've genetically engineered 3 wolves that they say resemble the dire wolves. The company sharing these videos showing the animals howling as cubs, and here sleeping and running in their habitat at an undisclosed secure location in the U.S.
People think it's a scary word, de-extinction. They immediately put us with Jurassic Park, and it's not. We're trying to develop these new techniques in order to save animals.
But the process does sound like something out of the 1993 blockbuster. The company says scientists relied on ancient preserved DNA from a tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull to decipher the direwolf genome. They then used gene editing technologies to rewrite the genetic code of the common gray wolf.
So one at a time, we take our gene editing tools and we go into that cell and we cut out the bit of DNA that looks like a gray wolf and paste in its place the DNA that looks like a direwolf.
Once a new genome was created, domestic dogs were used as surrogates, miraculously giving birth to Romulus, Remus, and their sister Khaleesi. Yes, named after Game of Thrones. But this scientific feat, no fantasy, and some online already questioning whether it's a step too far. Still, the technology is here, and scientists say it could shape the future of our ecosystem.
We produce something that is magnificent and science fiction at its finest.
Pretty amazing. The company says one reason they chose to bring back the direwolf is because of the importance of predators and helping revive ecosystems. Like in Yellowstone, they say reintroducing wolves help bring back beavers and songbirds. That said, the company has no plans to release any of these direwolves, which we haven't seen ourselves, by the way, back into the wild. They do, however, hope to breed more of them, and they're also working on other animals, including the woolly mammoth and the dodo, Savannah.
Okay, wow, that is something. Liz Kreutz, thank you very much. For more on this, let's bring in Carl Zimmer. He's a columnist for the New York Times. He has just written about this direwolf de-extinction. Carl, thanks very much for being with us. So a couple of things I heard there. The fact that this was sort of, it sounds like, mixed essentially with a common gray wolf. Then we have this dog surrogate going on to actually produce this so-called direwolf. So did they actually bring the species back, or is this almost like an entirely new species that is quite similar to a direwolf?
I would say these are gray wolf clones with some direwolf DNA, which makes them have some traits that direwolves had. I'm not sure that it would be right to say that they actually brought the species back, because gray wolves have millions of other genetic differences in their DNA.
Would you imagine that there's any type of concern about not knowing how these animals will act? Like, will they act like the prehistoric ancestor, and is not knowing that at all a concern?
Well, I mean, that's how science works. You do experiments, you test hypotheses. So, for example, we didn't know what color dire wolves were from the fossil record. And then scientists found ancient DNA. These colossal researchers found it. And they said, you know, based on what we understand about coat color, we think dire wolves were white. So they tested the hypothesis. And lo and behold, these animals are white, and they have very unusual thick fur for wolves, and they're big, too. That was another thing they were testing. So, you know, this is how science progresses.
While the company, of course, talked about the benefits, we just heard some of that in Liz's story, some people you interviewed have some hesitations. Tell us about those.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of scientists have concerns about de-extinction in the sense that they're like, you know, we're dealing with a massive extinction crisis right now. Perhaps one of the 6 top mass extinctions in the history of the planet. And so we have lots of, you know, threatened and endangered species. And, you know, a quick fix with some DNA alone is not going to help them. Now, it might help if you can, you know, introduce some genetic variation into some endangered species. But to then go and say, let's just, you know, quote unquote, bring a species back from oblivion seems like a distraction.
Carl Zimmer, thank you so much. Really a fascinating read your piece was, and just a fascinating conversation to have. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, tariffs under the tree? Yes, after the break. It's only April, but these new tariffs might already be weighing on the holiday shopping season. The major price shifts that could impact your wallet this year. Next on Morning News Now. We are back now with a closer look at President Trump's trade tariffs and the direct impact they could have on the products you buy. NBC News correspondent Ryan Nobles has been looking into this for us and joins us now. Hi, Ryan. Good morning.
Yeah, Savannah, it does seem like we are a long way from Christmas, but if you have kids of a certain age, they may have something like this iconic Tonka dump truck on their wish list. Now, this toy is built with parts from China, and the CEO of the company that makes them is warning that the price for this simple toy could double by the holidays.
The last thing a 5-year-old playing with a Tonka truck is thinking about is where the parts for their favorite toy are made. But come Christmas time, it may be a major concern for parents.
With 54% tariffs on production from China, that toy will be $45 this Christmas.
The Tonka truck is just one example of the major price shift expected in the wake of President Trump's tariff play. Companies will now have to pay more to import cell phones, sneakers, home goods, and yes, toys. Trump argues ultimately consumers and American workers will benefit.
We're not going to lose $1 trillion for the privilege of buying pencils from China.
But in order for the average consumer to benefit, the entire world economy will need to be flipped upside down.
The manufacturing hubs that exist in other countries don't exist here in the U.S., at least not yet.
The Trump team's goal is to balance the amount U.S. consumers buy and sell with other countries, a complicated task because American consumers depend on foreign goods. For example, the U.S. gets 97% of its clothing and shoes from other countries. CEOs say making goods here would be a major shift.
We're not in the manufacturing business. If that was available here in the U.S., we'd be open to it. It would take years.
Across industries, ramping up that type of production in the U.S. would be incredibly costly. Take, for instance, the iPhone, built with more than a dozen parts sourced from countries like Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and of course, China. A 54% tariff could cost an additional $300 per phone. The White House trade advisor pressed on Fox overnight.
Are we going to make iPhones in the United States?
That's what we're going to do. Yeah,
we're going to
be able to do it through more automation.
But for now, manufacturing is much cheaper in other countries. Apple has yet to say how they will handle those increased costs. The Trump administration is convinced the president's plan to implement what they call reciprocal tariffs will ultimately pay off. But this morning, one Biden administration official whose work the Trump team used to calculate its tariff rates, writing, quote, "Our findings suggest the calculated tariffs should be dramatically smaller, perhaps 1/4 as large." Brett Neiman also arguing that trade imbalances between countries may be reasonable, saying that, for example, Americans spend more on clothing made in Sri Lanka than Sri Lankans might spend on American goods, which makes sense considering the wealth and differences between the two countries.
And what President Trump has said is that he's fighting back against unfair trade practices from other countries. But by issuing these blanket tariffs, he's actually reorganizing the global economy. And American consumers and companies are having to bear a big part of the cost that comes along with that. That's because tariffs are a tax that U.S. companies, not these foreign nations, pay on imported products. For example, if a sneaker company is importing shoes from China, it has to pay an extra fee to the federal government. It's not the Chinese government that's paying that extra fee. And that added cost is then passed on to the consumer, in many cases in the form of higher prices. So, Savannah, you may want to get all of your holiday shopping done this week if you want to avoid these price hikes.
For real. Ryan, is that a personal Tonka truck?
This is my son's Tonka truck. I think he forgot we had it until I asked him about it last night. So.
There you go. Well, then you won't need to be buying anymore. That's good news for you. Ryan, thanks. Good to see you. Let's keep this conversation going with Brooke DePalma. She's a senior reporter for Yahoo Finance. Brooke, good morning. Great to have you in studio with us. Our viewers have seen you a lot. We have never seen you actually physically here, even though you're on Zoom with us. Okay, so let's talk about if this does ricochet us into the R word, a recession. We actually have some new information out today. It's kind of startling. Our colleagues at CNBC, they do this survey of CEOs. They found most CEOs are saying, yes, they think that's where we are headed. How concerned should we be about that?
Well, more and more economists are raising the likelihood of a recession happening. And what exactly is happening here that could lead to a recession is that we're going to see an increase in costs here because of these tariffs. Essentially, that means we're going to see an increase in inflation. If we see an increase in inflation, think about how much consumer spending makes up of the U.S. GDP. It's roughly 2/3. If consumers are already sick and tired of higher inflation that we've seen over the past few years, they'll pull back on spending. That means less money for these companies. That ultimately means less money to invest back into their workforce. And JP Morgan warning that this could lead to an increase in unemployment.
And Brooke, while we've been talking about the negative impact, just like that answer right there, you have looked, though, kind of at the opposite of this. Companies that could outperform in an environment like this. Who are they? What are the conditions that make it true for them?
Savannah, think about what is most important for consumers right now. They want value, and they essentially want this ability for these companies to bring down prices. They're also really focused on groceries here. So think Walmart and think Costco. Those are two companies that sell a majority of groceries to consumers. Because of their sheer scale and their sheer size, they'll have a stronger arm, so to say, with their suppliers in order to negotiate for those lower prices. And in addition to that, more and more consumers are going to double down on groceries. They're going to focus on those essentials, especially those low-income consumers who already have really been struggling here.
Right, absolutely. Also, we got to talk about the market volatility. I mean, yesterday was just totally crazy. This spike in the middle of the day, kind of because of the fake headlines. But then this continues like this all throughout the day. Looks like maybe we're going to start in a better place today. But what should people at home know about that? I mean, of course, that's got everybody staring at their 401ks, wondering what to do.
Yeah, well, buckle up because the market volatility is here to stay. We are seeing futures point higher this morning, but essentially those tariffs are still set to go into effect at midnight on Wednesday, April 9th. And there's talks of potential negotiations. That's what has investors really excited here. But many of my sources telling me that all this, as these new potential negotiations happen, as these tariffs roll into consumer prices, as companies try to use mitigation tactics in order to offset the cost, there's lots of still unknowns. And that's really what is spooking investors' fear. If you can, think long term. If you can, embrace this volatility that we're seeing and try not to look at your 401k right now.
Honestly, I haven't since it started last week. I'm like, let's just not think about it for a little bit. Brooke DePalma, thank you very much. Great to have you in studio. Well, let's dig a little deeper into the fallout of President Trump's tariffs with more on how Levi's is reacting to it all. An interesting one. CNBC's Silvana Henao has more on that and other money headlines for us. Hi, Silvana.
Hey, Savannah, good morning. Yeah, so the CEO of Levi Strauss says the company will be, quote, surgical with any price hikes instead of making across-the-board changes in response to tariffs. So Levi's is looking at all options, including cost-cutting and getting concessions from suppliers. Levi's makes many of its products in Asian countries subject to high tariffs, including Cambodia and Vietnam. But it's already imported most of what it needs for the spring and summer, and only about 1% of what it imports is made in China. World travelers may be rethinking visits to the U.S. amid growing reports of hostility at the border and some foreign nationals being detained for weeks or months. Bloomberg citing travel data says flight reservations from Canada through this September are down 70% from last year. The CEO of French hotel group Accor, which owns brands such as Fairmont and Sofitel, saying European bookings to the U.S. this summer are down 25%. The U.S. Travel Association says international visitors are vital to the U.S. economy. And General Motors showing off a new Chevy Corvette concept supercar, and it's an electric vehicle. It was created by GM's new advanced design studio in the UK, which opened yesterday. As the automaker, well, it prepares to launch Corvette sales across Europe. The car has some elements that remind you of a Corvette, but Electrek says it has more of a feel of a Ferrari or a Porsche. Now, GM designed the vehicle for both on-track performance and everyday on-the-road driving, Savannah.
All right, Silvana, thank you very much. Pretty cool. Well, a growing number of people are using virtual reality to take their exercise routine to new heights. So is it just a quirky fad, or is it the next fitness frontier? NBC News Now reporter Stephen Romo takes a look.
Punching, blocking, and dodging.
This is your chance to show off your smooth moves.
An immersive cardio boxing class, all from the comfort of your home or office.
Hello, FitXR.
Virtual reality workouts are the future, or at least that's the hope of companies like FitXR.
Things seem pretty advanced now.
Yes, the technology is so much better.
FitXR's director of fitness content, Kelly Cosentino, outfitted me with a MetaQuest 3S headset, which runs about $300. It comes with hand controls, and with a little bit of setup, you can be online getting an aerobic workout without the bike or treadmill.
Let's ramp it up a little bit.
How's it feeling?
She wanted to ramp it up, and I don't think I needed to ramp it up.
A newer feature of FitXR and many VR apps, the ability to use mixed reality, so you can see the actual room you're in with the virtual space superimposed.
How are we doing?
Really bad there for a second.
There are many other virtual workout companies like the similar Supernatural VR Fitness and Les Mills XR, which offers a dance-inspired version. For fans of these programs, working out without a gym membership is appealing.
I remember asking my friends and my family, be like, come to my class or work out with me. And like a lot of the times it's no. And it's because of the intimidation, or I don't feel comfortable doing those movements in front of people.
FitXR says rather than just targeting fitness enthusiasts, they hope to reach people who aren't getting enough exercise. Exercise physiologist Dr. Keith Diaz approves of that goal.
It's a way to get people moving and maybe making exercise more accessible to more people. So I'm a big fan of it.
According to the CDC, fewer than 25% of adults in the U.S. are meeting federal physical activity guidelines for both aerobics and muscle strengthening.
We're telling people to be doing 150 minutes of exercise a week.
Diaz says some people using VR may experience cyber sickness, which he says feels similar to motion sickness and can include dizziness, headache, and nausea. Taking frequent breaks and adjusting the visual settings can help.
Fantastic. Combo 1 coming in hot.
Later, I tried FitXR at home. The mixed reality function let me see my dogs and my surroundings.
My dogs are so confused.
And in the end, VR went a long way in winning over this skeptic who's used to real-world workouts. Woo! Stephen Romo, NBC News.
It really did look like it got him there. All right, when we come back, cleaning up, he's just been named the best dishwasher in America. We'll bring you the inspiring journey of one Chicago man. You will want to see this next on Morning News Now. Finally, this hour, it might be a chore to some, but one man in Chicago is using his talents as a dishwasher to inspire others. Randy Hall has been named the best dishwasher in America, and he has a story you won't soon forget. Reporter Courtney Sisk from our NBC Chicago has this story.
On any given weekend,
Friday, Saturday, and Sunday,
Beatrix in River North is buzzing with business.
Gotcha, thank you.
And as plates come and go,
this part of the kitchen is the heartbeat of the restaurant.
This man is behind the flow.
Today, I think I might have did maybe 200 already.
Randy Hall is the dish pit veteran.
18 and a half years.
He clears about 10 to 15,000 plates on weekend days.
I scrub basically all the plates and stuff by hand, then I put it in the machine. Best part is sitting on my coworkers.
Those coworkers, unbeknownst to Randy, nominated him for the Best Dishwasher in America award.
The general manager came back in and said she needs to talk to me. And I was like, uh-oh.
His hard work paid off.
Then she told me I won. I'm like, huh?
Plate magazine named Randy as the best dishwasher in the entire country. He says what sets him apart is that he does the job fully blind.
I got carjacked in 1994, got shot in the right eye, bullet went straight across, took out the back of my left eye.
Dealt a devastating hand, Randy didn't let it slow him down.
My mother told me, boy, you ain't a quitter. Get up and get out there and do your thing. When I came here, I felt like I was at home. They treated me like I was family, didn't discriminate toward me or treat me any different from anybody else.
John Economos has worked with Randy for 15 years and nominated him for the award.
There's not a lot of people that would pick up the pieces after that, and he did, and he has been, and he's been a wonderful employee and a good friend for a really long time.
Now, with the new title and accolades, Randy hopes his story can inspire others with disabilities.
Do the best that you can and take it one day at a time.
Okay, our thanks to NBC's Courtney Sisk for sharing that story with us. And a heartfelt congratulations to Randy for his years of hard work and dedication. What a guy. Such a cool story. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now. Don't go anywhere, though. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.